There was this thing called structural linguistics. And it was an approach to thinking about language and linguistics in which it's all about these blocks. Like, let's say you're laying out blocks as if you're like building a wall, thinking about folk tales from different cultures as this blocks. Here's the block in which somebody leaves their village. Here is the block in which somebody gets like a glass slipper or fur slipper, like I'm talking about Cinderella. Here's the thing with the relatives, like the evil stepsisters or something like that, and they mess things up and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so this thing that happens in linguistics ends up becoming popular in other realms. One of the folks in anthropology, who's named Claude Levi-Strauss, actually had this approach where he was trying to train other people to kind of think in this way. And he would say something like, okay, you take these index cards and you stick it on the wall, you kind of put them together, and then you build it out. And this becomes like a template. You can see how it's in this culture, it's in that culture, it's in this culture, it's in that culture. And what it is, it's like a master key, the skeleton key that unlocks all of culture or unlocks all of literature or unlocks all of language, you know? There's something like very seductive about that. It puts a lot of power in the hands of the critic to be able to make these pronouncements about everything kind of like being reducible to this blueprint. Like this entire structural kind of thing works so long as you don't look too closely at it. So long as you carve away all the exceptions that don't affirm this master plan that you're trying to build up as a critic. It's very reductive, a bit too clean. That's one of the reasons why I have a beef with Joseph Campbell.
I agree with what you're saying. How The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the way it affected me as a book reader, first of all, it affected me in the way that I started seeing through a lot of plot-based books. I can start reading a book and just from the tone, I can just start predicting things. And 75% of the time, I'm right. It's why I just became so inclined towards reading character-based stories. As a writer, the idea of that, right, I kind of took it as a challenge. I noticed my writing change after I read that, but I'm subconsciously not doing things the way they are supposed to be. And that took my writing to another level.
I love this idea, first off, that there might be this difference between you as a writer and you as a reader. The reader might find these ideas of Joseph Campbell's as seductive, you know, in the way that, let's say, a master key might feel seductive, powerful. But then as a writer, you find yourself taking it as a dare. You know, it's kind of like, okay,
how can I break this?
I love it. I love it because it's like, that's a kind of agency. Of course it should be a challenge. It's kind of like, am I doomed to write this story the way that, like, you know, through time, because
that's just the way that human beings work,
you know, or something like that. It's like, no, I think that genre, you know, and when I say genre, I mean kind of like just the norms and expectations around what counts as a novel, what counts as poetry, what counts as a play, you know, those are things that we can always play with. If we play a bit too hard with them, then people might get confused, might get alienated, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I absolutely wouldn't like boil it down to something like, well, these are unchangeable things about like human psychology and like all this kind of stuff. Like, I think that that's way too reductive. I think that there can be a very productive kind of like push and pull between us as readers and us as writers.
What you just said now made me think of how important it is, again, for people just to read and understand the norms of a genre, or even the hero structure is used by so many stories. And that's what it seems like Joseph Campbell's book is based on, is the hero's journey. And just even knowing that construct, if you learn it and know it well, you know how to just break one part of it maybe. And maybe, you know, you just tweak one little thing. It's like once you know the rules, then you can better know how to break them and make something that is a little more interesting or a little different.
Yeah, that's the value of that book.
There is a book that screenwriters love called Story. Story became this book that was very influential for the way that people structure their screenplays. One of the things that is absolutely amazing to me is how very, very, very structured screenplays can be. Like at X amount of minutes, you can expect this kind of thing to happen. And that to me is mind-blowing. But then I think about like how something like this could make sense within the movie industry. It becomes incredibly complicated and expensive, perhaps, to have a story that doesn't conform to something that is a very expensive production process. If you're writing a novel, you're not necessarily beholden to this kind of thing. If you're writing a book of poetry, you're probably definitely not, beholden to this kind of mega production process. So I would say that in that industry, in that genre, it's become immensely influential.
Yeah, I've read that one. I think it's by Robert McKee. It's a really interesting book, and it totally breaks things down piece by piece. And then a lot of times, just like you said, you could be sitting there and watching a movie and be like, oh, that's the midpoint right there. Okay, here they go from reactive to active. And okay, here comes the climax. And you can just kind of, here it goes. And
It's
then,
like clockwork.